This is my true story. On Thanksgiving weekend, I spent 3 days preparing my late wife's tourtière recipe to share with my son's family. He took one look at it, laughed, and dumped the entire dish into the garbage in front of his guests. He turned to me and said, "Nobody wants your old people food, Dad. Order us real pizza." The dining room erupted in laughter. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I stood very still and watched every face around that table. They thought they had broken me. They did not know I still held the deed to the lakefront cottage they posted about online every summer. By Monday morning, something happened that wiped the smiles off their faces forever. But before that, I need you to understand how we got here. It was supposed to be a simple family gathering, just close relatives, autumn leaves, and the smell of home cooking filling the house. I had been planning this meal for weeks, carefully measuring out the spices my wife once taught me to use, her handwritten recipe card propped against the kitchen window. 67 years of life had taught me that some traditions are worth preserving, even when you're the only one left who remembers them. I pressed my flannel shirt, the one my late wife said made me look distinguished for a man my age. I loaded the heavy cast-iron pot into my old Subaru, its contents still warm, wrapped in towels to keep the heat. The drive from my small bungalow in Scarborough to my son's house in Oakville took nearly an hour through weekend traffic, but I didn't mind. I thought they would appreciate it. I thought maybe for one evening, family would matter more than appearances. When I arrived, the house was already crowded with his colleagues from the tech startup, not family. Music pounded from expensive speakers. Wine bottles lined the granite countertops. My son, David, saw me standing in the doorway, balancing that heavy pot with both hands, like an offering. His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite name. Impatience, maybe. Or embarrassment. "Dad," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You didn't need to bring anything. We've got catering coming." I smiled anyway, my arms starting to ache from the weight. I told him it was Thanksgiving, that I'd made his mother's tourtière, the one he used to beg for as a child. A few people turned to look, curious about the old man interrupting their party. My son's jaw tightened. He was embarrassed that his father was stealing attention from his carefully curated gathering. I walked to the kitchen and set the pot on the island. It wasn't fancy like the charcuterie boards and imported cheeses scattered around, just an honest meat pie with flaky crust and the smell of cloves and cinnamon. I had written a small card, "Made with love, in memory of Mom." My grandchildren, teenagers now, glanced at it and immediately returned to their phones. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, looked away, busying herself with arranging wine glasses. My son came closer, his face flushed from whatever he'd been drinking. "You made this?" he asked, loud enough for the room to hear. "Like, from scratch?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. I felt it crawl up my spine like cold water. I said softly, trying not to make a scene. I didn't want to come empty-handed. It's what family does. He stepped forward, towering over me in his expensive suit, that cruel grin spreading across his face. "Dad, nobody eats this kind of stuff anymore. It's Thanksgiving 2024, not 1950. Then, before I could even respond, he picked up the entire pot, both handles, and walked it straight to the garbage bin. The lid clanged open. He tilted it, and I watched 3 days of work, 3 days of memory, 3 days of love slide into the trash with a wet, heavy thud. The room went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then someone laughed. Then another. Soon the entire dining room was howling, some people actually applauding. I stood there frozen, my hands still positioned as if I were holding something. For a moment, my brain couldn't process what had just happened. No anger, no sadness, just a strange clarity, like ice forming over warm water. My son's voice sliced through the noise, sharp and performative. "If you want it that bad, old man, fish it out. Or better yet, order yourself some real food from Skip." More laughter followed, deeper, crueler, lubricated by wine and the safety of a crowd. My knees felt weak, but I didn't fall. I just looked at him. Looked at the boy I had once carried on my shoulders through the CNE, the child who used to help his mother roll out dough in our tiny kitchen, now looking down at me like I was something to be discarded. The sound of laughter faded into a distant hum behind my ears. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, slow, heavy, methodical. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just nodded once, turned around, and walked out the front door, leaving my coat behind. The October air hit my face like a slap of cold lake water. I walked to my car under the amber streetlights, each one flickering as if it too wanted to look away from what had just happened. When I reached home, the silence of my empty bungalow felt almost merciful. I sat at the kitchen table, my wife's recipe card still sticky with flour dust, and I thought about every sacrifice that had led to this moment. The cottage up in Muskoka, the one I bought in 1985 with money saved from 20 years of factory work. The one where David learned to swim, where we spent every summer until his mother passed. The startup capital, $50,000 I gave him in 2019 when the banks wouldn't approve his loan. The RESP contributions for my grandchildren, $2,000 a year for the past 15 years, sitting quietly in accounts he'd long forgotten I controlled. The co-signed line of credit that kept his business afloat during the pandemic, $120,000 he'd promised to pay back soon. Every investment, every gift, every second chance, all of it suddenly visible, like bones beneath skin. I had built his comfortable life piece by piece, and now I finally understood what he'd done with it. I lit a candle in the darkness, set it on my wife's old saucer, and whispered a promise to her memory. They will never humiliate me again. The next morning, the laughter still echoed in my mind. People say humiliation fades with time, but they're lying. It settles into your bones. It clings to you like the smell of garbage. I sat at the same table, staring at that candle I'd kept burning all night. The wax had melted into strange shapes, and I knew something inside me had changed just as permanently. That night, when my son dumped my wife's recipe into the trash, something else happened too. Something quiet but irreversible. Every person who laughed showed me exactly who they were. It wasn't just his colleagues. My own grandchildren had smirked. My daughter-in-law had covered her mouth, but I'd seen the smile. Even the neighbors I'd helped shovel out last winter pretended not to see what was happening. I had become entertainment, the old man who didn't know when to stop showing up uninvited, the relic from another generation who couldn't take a hint. The garbage had smelled like wine and expensive cheese when I walked past it on my way out. I remember looking back at that bin, seeing the edge of my cast iron pot jutting out, the crust I'd worked so hard on, crushed and stained. And for a moment, I almost believed I deserved it. That's what decades of giving without gratitude does to you. It trains you to accept disrespect as if it were love wearing a mask. But as I drove home that night, something inside me went very still. Not broken. Still. Like water freezing into something harder, sharper, capable of cutting. After I left that house, I drove through the dark streets of the GTA in silence. The highway was empty. Just taillights, stretching ahead like red eyes in the dark. I passed the Tim Hortons, where I used to take David for Timbits on Saturday mornings, its fluorescent lights glowing against the October night. The cashier, an older woman who'd worked there for years, waved through the window. I didn't wave back. I just kept driving. When I got home, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in the dark for hours, listening to the furnace kick on and off, letting every second of that humiliation burn itself into my memory. I thought of my late wife, Eleanor. Her voice, her hands, her patience. She had warned me years ago, back when David first started making real money. "You're giving them too much," she'd said. "One day they'll forget who gave it to them." I used to laugh when she said that. I thought she was being overprotective, too old-fashioned. But Eleanor had seen something I refused to believe. The quiet rot that grows in hearts that never learn to say thank you. At dawn, I walked to the bathroom mirror. The man staring back looked older than I remembered. His face was lined with decades of overtime shifts, of missed hockey games to pick up extra hours, of quiet sacrifices that left no monuments. His eyes were tired but steady. I whispered to that reflection, "Enough." Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Later that day, I went to the park near the lake, the same one where I used to push David on the swings every Sunday. The benches were wet with morning frost, and the geese honked overhead, heading south for winter like they knew something we didn't. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the boy he used to be, how he would hold my hand and say, "Don't let go, Dad." Somewhere along the way, he had. By evening, the anger had cooled into something much more dangerous: clarity. I realized something important that night. Humiliation is only permanent if you accept it. I had spent my entire adult life building things: homes, businesses, futures, educations, and in the end, all that work still belonged to me. My son's laughter hadn't destroyed me. It had reminded me of what I still controlled. When I got home that night, I opened the filing cabinet in my basement office, the one that still smelled like Eleanor's lavender sachets. I pulled out a thick accordion folder, one filled with documents I hadn't looked at in years. Property deeds, investment statements, loan agreements, co-signed contracts. My name was still on every single line. My signature still carried legal weight. He had mocked me for being old, for being out of touch, for making old people food. But what he didn't understand was this: age doesn't erase ownership. It protects it. Experience builds walls that arrogance can't see. I ran my fingers over those papers, each one a quiet instrument of correction. He thought I was powerless. He thought I'd go home and accept my place as the embarrassing father who didn't know when his time was up. He had no idea that in humiliating me, he had awakened something that had been sleeping for too long: patience. I closed the folder gently and smiled for the first time since Thanksgiving. Tomorrow, the world would still laugh at me, but the day after that, they would stop. Because when silence finally moves, it doesn't warn you. It simply rewrites reality while you're busy celebrating. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. No dreams of garbage bins or laughter, just deep, restorative quiet. By morning, I had a plan. Not to punish him. Punishment is too temporary, too emotional. I wanted balance. He had taken my dignity in front of strangers. I would take his comfort in front of the world he'd built. The silence that followed humiliation became my greatest weapon. While they laughed, I had been listening. While they mocked, I had been calculating. They didn't know it yet, but the man they told to order pizza had spent 45 years building a foundation that could crumble with 3 phone calls and a morning of signatures. And now I was ready to make those calls. When Tuesday morning came, the decision was already made. There was no tremor in my hands, no heat in my chest, no rage clouding my judgment. Only a stillness so complete it felt like winter ice. That's when you know a man means business. When he stopped shaking, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat at Eleanor's old desk, and spread out the documents I'd gathered. For 30 years, I had signed my son's comfort into existence. The Muskoka Cottage, title in my name, for family use. The seed funding for his startup, structured as a convertible loan with a recall clause. The RESPs for my grandchildren, with me listed as subscriber and sole decision maker. The co-signed line of credit, $120,000 that the bank could call if I withdrew my guarantee. Every brick in his comfortable life had my fingerprints on it. It's funny how arrogance blinds people. They see an old man in a flannel shirt and think weakness. They see silence and think surrender. They never realize that age doesn't dull power. It sharpens it into something precise. Every deal he'd ever celebrated, every cottage weekend he'd posted on Instagram, every business milestone he'd bragged about at dinner parties, all of it was built on a foundation I'd poured. My name sat quietly on the concrete, a signature waiting for the right moment to matter. And that moment had finally arrived. I called the bank first, Scotiabank, the branch on Kingston Road where I'd done business for 40 years. The manager, Patricia Chen, knew me by name. "Mr. Harrison," she said warmly, "I thought you'd retired from all this financial planning." I smiled into the phone, my voice steady and calm. "I did, Patricia. But my son didn't." There was a pause on the line, the kind that tells you someone understands the weight of what's being left unsaid. "The line of credit we co-signed in 2020. I continued. "I'd like to exercise my right to withdraw my guarantee, effective immediately." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Harrison, you understand that we'll make the full amount due within 30 days. If he can't secure alternate financing, I understand perfectly, I said. Please proceed with the paperwork. It will be processed by end of business today, she replied quietly. Next was the cottage. The Muskoka property I'd bought in 1985 for $70,000, now worth close to $900,000, according to the last assessment. David and Jessica had been using it every summer, treating it like their own private resort, even renting it out on Airbnb during weeks they couldn't use it themselves, pocketing the income. They'd redecorated, replaced my old furniture with their modern pieces, painted over Eleanor's carefully chosen colors. They'd erased us from that space like we were merely the down payment on their lifestyle. I called my real estate lawyer, Martin Kowalski, a man I'd known since he was an articling student 30 years ago. Martin, I need to list the Muskoka property. Exclusively. Quickly. No family consultation. Richard, he said carefully, doesn't David consider that his cottage? He considers a lot of things his, I replied. That doesn't make them so. Check the deed. I heard papers rustling. A long silence. Then, you're still the sole registered owner. You have every legal right. But Richard, are you sure about this? Family complications. I'm very sure, I said. Listed at $875,000. Accept the first reasonable offer. Use a numbered company if you need to. I want this done within 2 weeks. Consider it done, Martin said quietly. I'll handle it personally. By the time the sun was fully up, the machinery was already in motion. Emails sent, documents filed, lawyers notified, banks alerted. What my son didn't understand about power is this. It doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it whispers through phone lines, slides through email servers, and rewrites entire futures before breakfast. By noon, I had restructured the RESPs. Technically, as the subscriber, I could withdraw the contributions, though not the government grants. But what I could do was change the beneficiaries. I called the investment firm. I'd like to redirect the RESP funds for David Harrison's children, I told the advisor. Change the beneficiaries to the scholarship fund at Centennial College. The one for mature students, returning to education. That's quite a significant donation, Mr. Harrison. Are you certain? Completely certain, I said. Those funds were meant to teach the next generation the value of education. Let them teach students who actually value the opportunity. The transfer would take 48 hours. By Thursday, $30,000 that David had counted on for his kids' university would be funding the education of students who'd actually had to work for it. Next came the business. The startup that David loved to brag about at dinner parties. The one that was finally profitable according to his LinkedIn posts. What he'd failed to mention at those parties was how he'd gotten started. My $50,000 investment in 2019, structured not as a gift, but as a convertible loan with equity options. I'd done it that way on purpose, on Eleanor's advice actually, because she'd always said, love your children, but structure your money like a businessman. I called my investment advisor at RBC. James, the convertible note I hold in my son's company. I'd like to convert to equity, then immediately sell my stake back to him at current valuation. That would trigger a buyout clause, James said slowly. At current valuation, we're looking at approximately $270,000. He'd need to pay you within 90 days. I'm aware of the terms, I said. I wrote them. This will put significant pressure on his cash flow, James warned. Yes, I said simply. It will. By the time the sun was setting on Tuesday, the foundation of David's comfortable life had developed cracks he couldn't yet see. But he would. By Wednesday morning, he'd start getting the calls. By Thursday, he'd start getting the letters. By Friday, he'd start to understand what his laughter had actually cost him. I didn't smile as I filed away the last document. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt complete. The man who had stood in that kitchen watching his wife's recipe slide into the garbage, that man had done something. He'd reminded his son of a truth that arrogance always forgets. Every throne has a foundation, and sometimes the builder takes back the stones. That evening, I went for a walk along the boardwalk at Woodbine Beach. The October wind off Lake Ontario cut through my jacket, but I didn't mind. A few runners passed me, younger people with earbuds and expensive athletic wear, moving through space like they owned it. I wondered if they knew how temporary that feeling was. How quickly confidence becomes dust when the ground shifts beneath your feet. I stopped at the spot where Eleanor and I used to watch the sunset, back when David was still young enough to build sandcastles and ask questions about why the sky changed colors. This same lake had been here then, would be here long after all of us. The only thing that changed was who stood on the shore and what they chose to remember. When I got home, there was a missed call from David. No voicemail, just the call. I didn't return it. There would be time for conversations later. Right now, silence was doing the talking for me. The quiet that follows humiliation became my greatest ally. While they laughed, I had listened. While they mocked, I had prepared. They didn't know it yet, but the man they told to order pizza had spent decades building walls they couldn't see. Legal walls, financial walls, the kind that don't fall down just because someone stops paying attention to them. Outside my window, the maple tree in the front yard was losing its leaves, each one falling with the inevitability of autumn. I watched them drift down, thinking about how nature doesn't apologize for what it takes back. Neither would I. Wednesday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of November weather that makes you want to stay in bed. But somewhere across the city, in his modern house in Oakville with its marble countertops and smart home technology, my son was waking up to a different kind of cold. The kind that comes from your phone, from official notifications, from the sudden realization that the ground you've been standing on was never actually yours. I imagined him reaching for his phone, still foggy from sleep, expecting the usual morning routine. Stock prices, maybe. Instagram notifications. Email from the office. Instead, what he found was a message from Scotiabank. Subject line, important notice regarding line of credit account, ending in 7,742. His hands would have tightened around the phone. His wife, Jessica, would have asked from beside him, "What's wrong?" But he wouldn't have answered yet. He'd have been reading, his eyes moving faster, his breathing changing. The words would have seemed impossible at first. Due to the withdrawal of guarantor support, the full outstanding balance of $127,342. 18 is now due within 30 days. Please contact us immediately to discuss repayment options or alternative financing. He would have read it twice, 3 times, his brain trying to make sense of something that didn't fit his reality. His father, the old man who made outdated meat pies and showed up uninvited, had just yanked the financial foundation out from under him. But that was only the first notification. I knew because I'd structured it that way. The others would follow throughout the morning, each one landing like another nail. By 9 a.m., his business partner would be calling. "David, did you see the email from your investor? Something about converting his loan to equity and demanding a buyout?" By 10 a.m., his accountant would be leaving urgent messages. "David, we need to talk about the Kowalski law letter regarding the Muskoka property. They're saying it's being sold. I thought that was your cottage." By 11 a.m., the investment firm would have sent the notification about the RESP changes, and his wife would be standing in their kitchen, her voice rising in panic. "The kids' education fund. Your father redirected it. All of it." I wasn't there to see it unfold, but I knew David well enough to imagine. The confusion would hit first, then denial, then anger, then finally, the cold grip of fear. The math would start adding itself up in his head without permission. 127,000 due in 30 days, 270,000 due in 90 days. The cottage, gone. His children's university money, gone. Nearly $500,000 of security evaporating in a single morning. The man who had laughed at my Tourtière would suddenly be calculating how to survive the next quarter. By noon, I knew they'd be in full crisis mode. I could picture Jessica pacing their pristine kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd been humiliated 4 days earlier, her voice shrill with panic. "How is this even legal? He can't just take everything back. We've been using that cottage for years. The kids consider it theirs. And David, my son, probably sitting at their dining table, the one I'd helped him buy when they first moved in, finally understanding his father hadn't been powerless. He'd been patient. There's a special kind of education that comes from loss. The kind that teaches you what gratitude actually means, not when it's easy, but when it's too late. Thursday morning brought the next wave. Martin Kowalski's office would have sent the formal notice. The Muskoka Cottage had received an offer. $860,000, all cash, closing in 3 weeks. As current occupants, David and Jessica would need to vacate the premises and remove all personal items by the end of November. I imagined David calling me, his voice different now. Not the loud, performative tone from the Thanksgiving party. Something smaller, tighter. "Dad, we need to talk." I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. "Dad, please. This isn't funny anymore." Another voicemail. I was sitting in my living room, Eleanor's old quilt across my lap, listening to my phone vibrate on the coffee table. Each buzz was a small confirmation, not of revenge, of correction. By Thursday afternoon, they must have been calling everyone. His business partner, their lawyer, Jessica's parents, anyone who might make sense of how the comfortable life they'd built could collapse in 72 hours. But no one could help them because everything was legal. Everything was documented. Everything was in my name. That evening, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. "Mr. Harrison?" A woman's voice, professional but strained. "This is Dr. Patricia Morrison. I'm calling from Credit Valley Hospital. Your son, David, is here. He's okay, but he came in with severe anxiety symptoms. Chest pain, difficulty breathing. We've ruled out cardiac issues, but he's asking for you. He's quite distressed." I sat very still, the phone cold against my ear. For a moment, I felt something crack in my chest. Not regret, something older. The instinct that makes fathers move toward their children no matter what. But then I remembered. The garbage bin, the laughter, my wife's recipe sliding into the trash while strangers applauded. "Tell him I'll think about it," I said quietly. "But Dr. Morrison, tell him something else. Tell him that when you throw away something precious, you don't get to decide when it comes back, if it comes back at all." I hung up before she could respond. That night, I didn't sleep much, not because of guilt, because of memory. I kept seeing David as a child, maybe 8 years old, standing in our old kitchen in Scarborough, his small hands covered in flour. Eleanor was teaching him to roll dough, and he was so careful, so focused. "Am I doing it right, Mom?" he'd asked. "Perfect, sweetheart," she'd said. "You're doing it perfect." When did that boy become the man who threw his mother's recipe in the garbage? When did careful hands become cruel ones? I wondered if Eleanor, wherever she was, could see what I was doing. Would she approve, or would she tell me I'd gone too far? I looked at her photo on the mantel, the one from our 30th anniversary. She was smiling, but there was steel in her eyes. Eleanor never suffered fools, even when those fools were her own children. "You'd tell me to finish what I started," I whispered to the photograph. "You'd tell me that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just enabling." The photo didn't answer, but I felt steady in the silence. Friday morning, they came to my house, all of them. I was sitting in my front room, drinking coffee and reading the Toronto Star, when I saw the car pull up. David's Audi, the one with the lease I'd co-signed 2 years ago. Another thread I could have pulled if I'd wanted to. They got out slowly. David, Jessica, and my 2 grandchildren, Madison and Kyle, both looking uncomfortable in a way teenagers excel at. They walked up my driveway like they were approaching a stranger's house, which, in a way, they were. I let them knock 3 times before I answered. When I opened the door, David's face stopped me cold. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. His eyes were sunken, his expensive suit rumpled. Jessica stood beside him, her arms crossed, defensive but desperate. The kids hung back, staring at their phones, not wanting to be part of whatever this was. "Dad," David said, his voice cracking. "Please, can we talk?" I looked at him for a long moment. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd driven to hockey practice at 5 in the morning, the young man whose university I'd paid for, whose wedding I'd funded, whose entire adult life I'd subsidized without ever asking for thanks. Talk, I said. Not an invitation, just permission. David glanced at his family, then back at me. Can we come in? No, I said simply. You can talk from there. I saw something flicker across his face. Anger, maybe, or disbelief. He wasn't used to his father saying no. Dad, you're destroying us, he said, his voice rising. The bank, the cottage, the business buyout, the kids' education money. You're taking everything. We're going to lose the house. Do you understand that? I understand perfectly, I said. Do you understand what you did on Thanksgiving? Jessica stepped forward, her voice sharp. That was a mistake. David was drunk. He apologized. No, I said, looking directly at my son. He didn't. Not once. Not a text. Not a call. Nothing. Until the money disappeared. That's not an apology. That's panic. David's face flushed. I'm apologizing now. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. It was stupid. I was showing off. I shouldn't have done it. You threw your mother's recipe in the garbage, I said quietly, in front of strangers. You told me to order pizza like I was some homeless man begging at your door. And then you laughed. Do you remember laughing, David? He looked at the ground. I was drunk. Being drunk doesn't create cruelty, I said. It just stops you from hiding it. Madison, my 17-year-old granddaughter, suddenly spoke up, her voice small. Grandpa, this isn't fair to us. We didn't do anything. Why are you punishing us? I looked at her. This girl I'd bought birthday presents for every year, who'd never once sent a thank you card, who'd been smirking at her phone while I'd stood humiliated in her kitchen. You laughed too, Madison, I said gently. Maybe not out loud. But you didn't stop it either. None of you did. We were scared, Kyle mumbled, still not looking up from his phone. Scared of what? I asked. Scared of standing up to your father? Scared of showing an old man some basic respect? Jessica's voice turned cold. So this is about respect? You're going to bankrupt your own son because of your ego? No, I said. I'm teaching him what my father taught me. That everything you have can disappear if you forget who helped you build it. That family isn't a right. It's a responsibility. David's voice broke. Dad, please. I'll do anything. I'll pay you back. I'll apologize publicly. Whatever you want. Just stop this. Anything? I asked. Except stand up for me when it mattered, I said. Except treat me with dignity in my own presence. Except act like the man I raised instead of the stranger you've become. I stepped back and put my hand on the door. The paperwork is filed. The decisions are made. If you can find alternative financing, good luck to you. If not, you'll learn to live differently. Either way, you'll learn. You can't do this, Jessica hissed. We'll fight you in court. Go ahead, I said calmly. Every document is legal. Every signature is mine. Every lawyer will tell you the same thing. I gave you everything, and I took it back. That's not theft. That's just the end of generosity. I started to close the door. David put his hand out to stop it. Dad, please, I'm begging you. I have nowhere else to turn. I looked at his hand on my door, then at his face. For just a moment, I saw the 8-year-old again. The one covered in flour, asking if he was doing it right. David, I said quietly, on Thanksgiving, you had a choice. Show your father respect, or show your friends your power. You chose power. Now you get to learn what happens when power meets consequences. I closed the door gently but firmly. Through the wood, I heard Jessica's voice, sharp and bitter. This is insane. Your father is insane. I heard David's response, muffled but broken. No, he's not. I heard their footsteps retreating down the driveway, car doors slamming, the engine starting. Then, silence. I walked back to my chair, sat down, and picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. Outside, November leaves scattered across my lawn, and somewhere in the distance, a streetcar rattled along Queen Street, carrying people to places they needed to be. The following Monday, Martin called. Richard, the cottage sold. Firm offer. Cash deal. Closes December 1st. Good, I said. Everything else proceeding? Your son's lawyer reached out. They're exploring options. But without your co-signature, the bank won't extend his line of credit. They're looking at liquidating assets to cover it. That's his decision to make, I said. Indeed it is, Martin replied. There was something in his voice. Not judgment, just observation. Richard, can I speak as a friend, not as your lawyer? Go ahead. What you're doing is legal. It's justified. But it's also permanent. These aren't strangers. This is your family. Are you certain you want to burn this bridge completely? I thought about that. About bridges. About the one I'd tried to build on Thanksgiving with a meat pie and a handwritten card. About how they'd thrown it in the garbage. Martin, I said finally. The bridge burned the moment my son laughed at his mother's memory. I'm just cleaning up the ashes. Understood, he said. I'll keep you posted. December came cold that year. The first real snow fell on the 10th, covering Toronto in white that looked clean until the cars turned it gray. I shoveled my driveway by hand, the same way I'd done it for 40 years, the same way David used to help me with when he was young enough to think shoveling was fun. I didn't hear from him again until Christmas Eve. A card arrived in the mail. Plain white envelope, my address written in handwriting I barely recognized as my daughter-in-law's. Inside was a card with a generic winter scene. The message was brief. Dad, we've moved into a rental in Mississauga. The kids are adjusting. David is working 2 jobs. Jessica went back to work. We're managing. We hope you're well. We hope someday you can forgive us. We miss you. David. I sat with that card for a long time, turning it over in my hands. No excuses, no anger, just facts, and a tiny seed of humility. I thought about responding, about calling, about showing up at their rental with groceries or a check to help them through. Then I thought about the garbage bin, about the laughter, about standing in front of strangers while my own blood made me into a punchline. I put the card in a drawer with all the others. The birthday cards my grandchildren had never sent. The Father's Day cards that stopped coming years ago. The thank you notes that were always in the mail. By spring, I heard through Martin that David had sold his car, downsized his business, and was slowly rebuilding. Jessica was working as an office manager. The kids were in public school instead of the private academy. They were living smaller, quieter lives. The kind of lives that teach you what matters. I never called. I never visited. But I also never stopped thinking about them. 1 year later, on Thanksgiving weekend, I made tourtière again. Just for myself. Eleanor's recipe. Every step done exactly right. When it came out of the oven, I sat at my table alone and ate 1 slice. It tasted like memory and flour and time. It tasted like every sacrifice I'd ever made turned into something solid and real. That night, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, David stood there, alone. He looked different, thinner, older. More like the boy I remembered before money and success had reshaped him into someone I didn't recognize. Dad, he said, I know I don't have the right to be here. I know what I did. I know what I destroyed. He held out his hands. In them was a small pot, covered with a dish towel. I made tourtière, he said, his voice shaking. I used Mom's recipe, the card you kept. I found a copy online. It took me 6 tries to get it right. I don't know if it's any good, but I made it. And I brought it here, not because I want anything, not because I expect forgiveness, just because, his voice broke, just because I wanted you to know I finally understand what I threw away. I looked at him, at my son, at this man who had humiliated me, who had learned the hardest lesson of his life, who was standing on my doorstep holding a pot of meat pie, like an olive branch made of flour and apology. You worked 2 jobs, I said. It wasn't a question. 3, he said. The kids are in public school. It's good for them, he said. They're learning things they never learned before. Like what? Like how to be grateful, he said. Like how to say thank you. Like how to respect the people who helped them get where they are. I stood there, my hand on the door, 50 years of fatherhood weighing on me. Every diaper changed, every hockey game attended, Every sacrifice made without asking for applause. And then the garbage bin, the laughter, the cruelty of entitlement. "Come in," I said finally. "Put the pot on the stove." He looked at me, his eyes wet. "Really? Come in," I repeated. "We'll eat it together. If it's terrible, I'll tell you. If it's good, you'll know your mother taught you better than you remembered." He stepped inside, carefully, like a man entering sacred ground. We walked to the kitchen together. He set the pot on the stove. I got out 2 plates. We served ourselves in silence. The tourtière was decent, not perfect. The crust was a little too thick. The spices weren't quite balanced. But it was made with effort, with intention, with the first real attempt at understanding I'd seen from him in years. "It needs work," I said after the first bite. "I know," he said. "But you made it," I said. "I made it," he confirmed. We ate in silence for a while. Then David spoke, his voice quiet. "I spent a year being angry at you, for taking everything, for destroying what I'd built. But Jessica finally told me the truth. She said, 'You didn't destroy what I'd built. You took back what you'd built.' And she was right. Everything I had, you gave me. Every step up, you'd lifted me. And I thanked you by treating you like garbage." "Yes," I said simply. "You did. I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "But I need you to know I understand now. What you did wasn't revenge. It was teaching, the hardest lesson I've ever learned." I looked at my son, this man who finally looked like he'd been humbled by life instead of protected from it. "Forgiveness isn't something you give once," I said. "It's something you earn over time. Keep making the tourtière. Keep working the jobs. Keep teaching your children what I failed to teach you. And maybe, eventually, we'll find our way back to something that looks like family." "I'd like that," he said, his voice breaking. "But Dad, even if you never forgive me, I want you to know I'm sorry. Not because everything fell apart, but because I forgot who you were. I forgot what you sacrificed. I forgot that the man making old people food was the same man who gave me everything." I nodded slowly. "That's a start." We finished the meal. When he left, he didn't hug me, didn't ask for money, just said, "Can I come back next week? I'll make it again. I'll keep making it until I get it right." "You can come back," I said. "But David, if you ever disrespect me again, there won't be a next time. This is your second chance. You won't get a third." "I know," he said. "I know." I watched him walk down my driveway, get into his old Honda, the one that replaced the Audi, and drive away into the autumn evening. Inside, I looked at the 2 plates on my table, both empty. The food wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And sometimes, honesty is the first step back from the edge of everything you've lost. I cleaned the dishes slowly, Eleanor's old dish towel in my hands, and for the first time in a year, I felt something that wasn't anger or satisfaction. I felt possibility. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, my son had finally learned the lesson that power without respect is just borrowed time. That family isn't about blood. It's about choice. The choice to honor the people who built the ground you stand on, or the choice to throw their offerings in the garbage and learn what happens when the ground disappears. He'd made his choice once. Now he was making a different one. Whether it would last, only time would tell. But for now, on this Thanksgiving evening, there were 2 empty plates on my table, and that was enough.